So welcome everybody. We're going to officially start our evening together here. We are super lucky that we have Sharon Gary-Smith. She's the newly elected president of the Portland chapter of the NAACP with us this evening. We're going to learn a lot more about her and about the organization. And we've got just a couple of quick things that we're going to go through together before we start that program. So I'm going to just get us started by talking about the mission of Take Part. And so some of you have joined us before, but for those of you who might be your first time, the mission of Take Part is to confront racism and to engage in dismantling the systems that perpetuate ingrained racial inequality. We try to do this through events, education, and outreach that foster engagement in building a community where all people are treated with equality and respect. We were only doing a few in-person events, and then COVID hit, and all of a sudden we have started all these online events, and we are grateful that that's an option for us at this time. So we do record this, and it'll be available for anyone who might want to share it with a friend afterwards. So we try to bring a lot of different people together to enrich the discourse. So the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the presentations are those of the individual speaking. So they don't necessarily reflect any opinion of the Take Part board or its members, but we are delighted that they are here to share the discourse with us. We have a couple of communication agreements that we try to just adhere to, mostly to allow us to have good conversation together. The first one is to listen. Listen more, and listen especially hard if something makes you uncomfortable. We are fine with understanding that we might not all come from the same viewpoint, so engaging the tension is okay, but let's not indulge any drama. We're not here for the drama, we're here for great conversation. My favorite of all is wait. Why am I talking? Now that's something I always ask myself, but tonight I do have a reason. So it's kind of fun to look at that and remind ourselves everybody else's opinion is equally important. And we really believe in consultation and collaboration. It's not a competition. It's not about whose answer is right. It's really better understanding each person so that we can actually enrich the conversation. And finally, we want to maintain a safe space for difficult conversations. So sometimes really important things will come up that will press a button for somebody. And we want this to be a safe space to have that conversation. So it's fine to take away all the lessons you learn and the insights you gain. What we try to leave behind is who said what. Okay. So then I think that we'll be hearing a lot from Sharon Gary-Smith tonight, which is my wonderful opportunity is to actually get to introduce her. But I want to just say briefly that she's going to speak to us for a little while, and at the end of that formal presentation, we're going to have question and answer. So I really encourage you to go ahead and write your questions in the chat, or to think about jotting down a question that comes up for you so that you'll be prepared to ask it. We'll talk a little bit more about that process when we get to the end of the presentation. So where that brings us to is actually speaking with Sharon and letting her have the floor. So it's my honor to be able to introduce her tonight. And it was kind of fun. She's newly elected as president of the NAACP here in Portland, which means that I got to go online and do a little search, and she shows up really quickly. So it's really fun to see. She had some really interesting things to say. Although she may be the newly elected president, she has 40 years of great experience in working as an activist. I pulled out a couple of her quotes from different places that she said, and part of what I really liked about her is that she said she's inspired by those who want to make changes in the local environment, because many of us have talked about, thinking globally, but acting locally is a great first step. So it's a great way to start this conversation. Ms. Gary-Smith is actually a nationally recognized champion of social justice. She graciously sort of came out of retirement, which I've come to think is kind of a myth that any of us actually retire. Seems like the jobs just change. So it's lovely that she actually stepped forward to give leadership to the local Portland branch of NAACP. I really like the fact that she was recognized for her work over time. And in 2017, she received the Gottfried Lifetime Achievement Award from the City of Portland for human rights the Human Rights Commission. And on top of that, in March of 2020, she was honored by Governor Kate Brown as an outstanding Oregon Woman of Achievement. And that was selected by the Oregon Women's Commission. So it's wonderful to have somebody with her experience. Another thing I really enjoyed reading about is that she describes herself in this way, which I love. It says she describes herself as a grassroots, on the ground, in your face organizer. Now, I love a woman who can claim her power and say, I'm here to help. And it's not going to be just words. We're going to be a little action involved. She's working side by side with younger leaders in the NAACP. And I think that will be interesting to hear from her, kind of what that group is intending to take forward as their action items and how she sees that coming together. I love the fact that she uses the term that she's working together with members of the community to play a more prominent role in local decision-making, whether that's about police, education, healthcare, lots of key issues that speak to her heart. But I really think it's important that she says that having a seat at the table of these discussions is important in a time of racial reckoning and change. And that concept of the time for change and racial reckoning seems to be right with us and very prominent every time we turn around lately. So I really appreciate this very much. So having said that, I would also tell you that, when you call people and you get their voicemail, sometimes you get that leave a message, or sometimes if you call mine, you get some kind of pre-recorded thing. But I tell you, Ms. Gary-Smith has the nicest, warmest, most compassionate voicemail message I've ever heard. So that speaks well of the woman. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon for her conversation with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am so excited. And I must say right now, that it doesn't happen often, that I am so overwhelmed by seeing people that I have not seen for a while, to know that we are still on the road. I see, and I can't call everyone, but I see the librarian, Queen Librarian, Patricia Welch. I see Edwina Watson. Of course, I see Iris. I wouldn't be here without her grabbing, pulling, and pushing me forward. But I see my nephew, long time no see, Tecumseh Jackson. And I just have to say, what a wonderful moment to see you again. And we'll be talking, just all of you. Thank you so much. I thought it would be nice to talk tonight, and my daughter is here, so she could take over and do this for me. But I thought that I would tell you about the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I wanted to talk about it because there's so much learning. There's what we assume we know, and there is a richness of what we are yet to find. The mission hasn't changed. And so I put together a program, certainly with my daughter's technical nerd assistance, to give you a glimpse of the NAACP as a national organization and what that means on the ground in communities like Portland, like the state of Oregon. And so we'll begin. In 1909, the NAACP was founded in New York City. It was founded by a group of courageous, known and unknown, powerful interracial colleagues, some of whom you might recognize in the next slide. W.E.B. Du Bois, sociologist. Ida B. Wells, journalist. And I'm excited that Ida B. Wells is going to be watching us from now on in Portland, Oregon, because a school I would have never expected, Wilson, has changed the name, Lincoln has changed the name, and it will be Ida B. Wells High School. That's significant. We had Mary White Covington, a journalist, Dr. John Haynes Holmes, a minister, and a number of others who came together to fashion an organization that was to seek justice for African Americans. Next slide, please. The Portland NAACP branch that is depicted here was founded in 1914. That's significant. 5 years after the founding of the National Association, Portland, Oregon's chapter was founded, and it is the oldest consistently chartered chapter west of the Mississippi. 2 members started this chapter and founded it, Dr. J.W. Merriman and the late Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, who was the editor of The Advocate, the first African-American newspaper in this area. Next slide, please.
Woke up this morning with my mind.
Always punctuated the civil rights songs to hip hop. The NAACP membership photo that you see in front of you now, it's just the classy membership photo taken in 1950. You'll notice 2 red arrows. Seated in the front on the far right, second in, was Verdell Rutherford, and above her, her husband, Otto Rutherford. They respectively served as secretary and president here in Portland, and they are the archivists who captured in photos the power and the performance and the history of the Portland NAACP. These photographs are archived at Portland State University's library, and they're an amazing treasure trove of what was going on and who was involved in moving justice forward in our state. Next slide, please. This is the membership branch meeting. We gotta get on up. Between 1953 and 1954, the NAACP was visited by the national lobbyist Clarence Mitchell. And in that previous slide, he helped the Portland group to push forward support for Senate Bill 169 that went before our legislature to outlaw second-class citizenship, particularly housing accommodations in Oregon. On the left, you see the regional conference in the mid-1950s. And on the right was the Youth Council. Notice the numbers, the energy, the size of the Youth Council. That is not merely a program of the National NAACP, but allows young people, leaders, who are always at the front lines of social justice movements, to be able to organize, to move forward, to work in collaboration with their elders to achieve justice for all. And this was the Youth Council in 1956. Next slide.
Clap your hands, please.
On the left, young women-led youthful movement for justice in Portland called Fridays for Freedom. And on the right, Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes, senior pastor, Allen Temple CME Church, longtime social justice warrior, and leader of the AMA, Albina Ministerial Alliance, Police Accountability and Justice Committee, which he co-chaired with the late Reverend Dr. T. Allen Bethel. The songs that you heard, Hell You Talking About, is the 21st century version of marching and protesting by young people that calls out the names of the many African American, Blacks, women, children, men, young men, elders who've been murdered at the hands of police. Next slide. Here in the 21st century, the NAACP's mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, economic equality for all persons, and still to eliminate race-based discrimination that adversely affects African American, Blacks, other people of color in this country. I'm proud that our new leadership team of the NAACP is composed of members who recognized we could not have a disconnect between our fight for justice externally and our inability to be heard, recognized, to speak truth to power internally. And so in 2019, a group joined together and they wanted to work on and build a platform where all members felt included. One voice, one vote. And from that group emerged a three-pronged platform for justice: accountability, integrity, and transparency in how we organized, in how we met, in how we could raise our voices in disagreement, but not dissent. How Black women's leadership could be elevated and amplified. How young people who are always on the front lines of movements, who are in the streets and who bring knowledge, skill, and youthfulness to new leadership for our time, could be heard, could join with elders who've been there, done that, in a way to move justice and racial justice forward in our city, in our counties, in our state. And that platform continues to inform us now in the present. It informs us, how do we move together? How do we join with allies? How do we make more allies become co-conspirators in the fight for justice for everyone? Whether it's police, accountability, and reform, whether it's housing development that doesn't happen when we're pushed out to the edges, whether it's economic development and opportunity, vitality in our communities, educational equity and access to the best schooling, remembering and centering the work around Blacks, African Americans, and all who are marginalized and dispossessed. Next slide. Contact information. She's on this Zoom today, so I hope that assistant at pdxnaacp.org hears from all of you who are thinking of, interested in becoming a member, renewing your membership, and we're giving you guidance on how to make sure you insert 1120B on the drop-down unit finder so you're a member of our chapter. And we ask you to send a confirmation email so we have a record and are looking for you. Next slide. To say I'm surrounded by the best thinking, young, passionate, informed, Smart minds is an understatement. You've met me as the new president, but no president stands if they want to stand well and right without having a slate of others who are leaning into the work and taking on the mission. To my right, Tamia Deary, first vice president. Down below me, and not because he's the only male officer, is Donovan Smith, second vice president. Next to him on the right is Natalie Resch, secretary. And to her right, Ryan Hills, treasurer. We are also joined by at-large executive committee members at large. Our meetings are open. The membership meeting, we want you to join, of course. But the Portland and the national NAACP exist as more and more and more decide to join the movement for justice. I want you to roll up your sleeves. And in fact, for those of you and take part, to even consider rolling your sleeves further up because you're already in the work of anti-racism, of anti-white supremacy. We are looking at environmental justice that is influenced by race and place and climate change. We are looking, as we said, at police accountability to really serve and protect all of us. We are informed by the political action that allows us to make change in Oregon, in our counties, in our cities. On school boards, on water boards, that join others in the community. That's the NAACP, past, present, and future. And as I thank you for being here, for being in the work, for being in the world where social justice and racial justice work can happen, I encourage you to consider what I often say to my friends and family and colleagues. I want a time to come where Black lives matter here. Because if our lives really matter to you, all lives will matter more. Thank you so much to the Take Part team for underscoring the work, for allowing me to talk, for all of you who've joined, and I hope you have lots of questions we can answer. And in closing, I hand you Eyes on the Prize.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Paul and Silas, bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. nothing for my journey now. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
Thank you.
This is such an incredible opportunity, and thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I saw so many things popping up that talked about how powerful the music is and how music really does speak to us in a way that sometimes other words and things can't. So that's really amazing. But we have this incredible time together tonight, and we have plenty of time for really great questions from those people who are with us. So I'd like to give you a chance to please go into the chat room, leave a bunch of questions. I think it's so cool that so many people are really touched already by the conversation, that I'd love to have some direct questions come through that we could talk about. So when we do the Q&A, what's going to happen here is that there's somebody kind of monitoring the chat room to see if we can get our questions up and ready. You can also raise your hand, which is, I understand it now, is in the reaction button. They moved it. So when you go over to the reaction button at the bottom of your screen, at least that's where it is on mine, you can actually find the way to put your hand up. And we have a question from Fred Cooprider already. How can you join the NAACP?
Absolutely. Our branch, we are still in transition. We've only been official since January 2nd. So the number of requests that we're fielding, I would encourage you, Fred, and everyone, either renew or to be a new member by going to NAACP.org. That's the national site. You click on join. They have a very interactive site. Click on join. There is a unit finder. You want to put in 1120B. That's our particular branch. And then you want to fill in the rest of the information. It's $30 adult membership. It's $15 for young people up to about 17. There are lifetime memberships. And if you would take a screenshot or send that email to assistant@pdxnaacp.org, you will get a confirmation email. That'll allow us to make sure we get you on the rolls.
Great.
Thanks. I'm looking for your membership now.
Okay. Another question here is, what are NAACP's top priorities in 2021 for Portland?
And I'm going to ask also, if you don't mind, I see a number of my NAACP officers, executive committee members hiding out. They know that the reason that that my presentation might have been shorter than you expected, because I talk fast. So I can take 30 minutes and make it 15. So I would love to hear others answer as well. Donovan Smith, second vice president, I saw him. Ryan Hills, treasurer, yeah, I'm calling you out, I'm older. Lily Copenhagen, see there.
Hey, Ms. Sharon. Hello, everybody, and great presentation. So, you know, we all, when we were running as part of the Rise Up platform that Ms. Sharon mentioned, we all had our own kind of individual platforms. As y'all can imagine, people come to NAACP with concerns about pretty much everything. So having kind of focused agendas is important. Part of what I ran on was, you know, just defunding the police was something that was heavily requested. It's not a new thing. People have been asking for us to pull money from our police budgets for quite some time, police and military for that matter. So really pushing that issue and looking at how reinvestment with those dollars looks. I've been very interested in reparations and what that looks like. And so there is a federal bill, HR 40, which has been introduced every year since 1989 by Representative John Conyers. And, he passed some years ago. So Sheila Jackson, a representative from Texas, has reintroduced that bill. But it's supposed to look at what reparations for the hundreds of years of chattel slavery and then the institutionalized anti-Blackness in lawful form, what that is supposed to look like for America from a federal level on down. So I encourage everybody to, bug our senators about that. We have like Senator Ron Wyden has not signed on as a co-sponsor.
Give it a second, it'll come back.
Yep. And really working on the peace stuff grant, the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I think that is a important bill that was led by Black and brown folks that, to get us into or help power more of the initiatives that are already happening on an environmental front for us and get more people ushered into. There's a lot of money in that particular grant. I mean, we're talking about starting at $100,000. So and all the way on up, I want to say to close to $500,000 for years. So really pushing on those fronts, but also just continue to listen to what community needs do pop up and seeing how we can address those. I'll close on this. Reparations and restitution are two different things. We are not getting reparations through local initiatives. Reparations ultimately will be coming from our federal level. What happens on local levels are redress and restitution. And I don't want us to get confused, because reckoning with what this country has done, building on our communities back is something that pretty much will be a once in a lifetime thing. So want to make sure we actually get that right when we do it.
Great answer, and really nice comprehension there, because there are so many things that what you said earlier in your answer was about how important it is to figure out how to do a focused agenda in such a way that you can allow us to support and allow everyone to support the work that's being done in a way that will move things forward. And that's not an easy thing to do. So, congratulations on your election, and, we'll really look forward to that. You'll be happy to know that in the chat, people are taking note of the HR 40 and looking at what they can do to try to actively support that moving out of committee. So that's great news.
I think also I would add that when we talk about that agenda, if you look at displacement, economic development that only happens after people are moved out and gentrification happens. We want the economic vitality of communities, resourcing of communities. I think last year of our communities, if they had no value, how is it that the property goes through the roof once we're removed? And so the reclamation, those who were pushed out, put out, were never paid what they were supposed to be paid for that land. I'm a legacy child, and many of you on here, many of my friends, I say that because my parents had property and it was taken, pennies on a dollar, to put in the Memorial Coliseum. And I have an idea of whose name should be on the Memorial Coliseum. Then there is the Emmanuel Hospital legacy, Emmanuel expansion, where thousands of homes were taken and they were supposed to replace them, have not, and claim no responsibility because it wasn't legacy, it was just Emmanuel. But when that happened, so those kinds of issues, workforce, employment, representation, we still see the impact pre-COVID and during COVID, and certainly after COVID, of who's most harmed: Black and other people of color, Indigenous people, who are harmed the most, have the least resources, and want to at least have the opportunity to compete equitably. Those are the issues that matter to us individually. They certainly matter to the NAACP and to many of you.
Great. Ms. Gary-Smith, is there someone else you'd like to call out and invite them to offer their thoughts from your board?
I'm sorry, Mr. Larry Hill. Wow. I would love to hear more questions, things that you would like to know from us. People know they're on, they're on blast with me now. So I would hope that, Ryan and Lily, and I saw an old friend, Harriet Dennison, who has funded for years, funded grassroots community work that the major funders were not funding because it was often people of color, communities of greatest need. And so to see all of you on here tonight, that's the magic of Zoom. I didn't see much about Zoom. That's the magic that we're all here and in this conversation.
Great. Wonderful. Well, one of the things you called out earlier today was you pointed out that you are a new board and mixed board of experience and young leadership. And I'd love to hear from your team and from you about how are you intentionally developing that relationship between young leadership that can carry us forward and also learn from the past.
I think I would lead it off and they will pick up on it now. I like to tease Donovan, Ryan, and others that often when we're doing our thinking comes from an organizing mentality. I would say each of us has organized, has worked to create space where we were working with others in concert with or leading to get something done and to get it done right. And so I like to tease at times that I might sound like I'm always negotiating. I've been in all of these large spaces or with electeds and others. And I said, but I am an angry, gentle woman at heart. I use what I need to get in the door, and I always bring those that were not expected to be there. So if I'm invited, you're going to find out before the door closes that those you didn't invite are actually there as well. And I tease him. I said, I'm an old chief. I've been doing this work of organizing and informing and causing people to believe that they have the power together to make change. And so I can learn from the young ones, the ones that have a different way, a different beat. But then I play this music and I engage because I'm learning and leading, and they're doing the same. So it is the most beautiful mix of who comes to the table, how long you've been at the table, and what you can offer, even to recraft the table. That's the joy for me. The excitement is I'm always ready to hear how we can do it different, as I'm sure Take Part has the same experience. And I am the elder, and it is quite wonderful because I'm ready to sit down. And the idea that the torches of leadership are never passed, they're taken, and they move forward with it. And that's the most exciting thing for me is the ideas, the energy, the excitement, because I'm looking for a time where I'm just going to be sitting over there on the side.
It'll probably be a while before that happens, but because you're just such an asset to the team. So good for you.
Watching the movement.
There you go. There are several questions now, so
Wow.
I'm going to kind of ask you a few of them. The first one is, how receptive has the city leadership been to suggested policy changes to rectify racial injustices?
Who wants to take that one? First of all, there's city leadership, meaning electeds. And the answer is actually in that statement. I think that there is a lot of performative response. Politicians say they're dealing with a lot of complex issues. I understand that, but there's no issue that is more complex than intentional, systematic, rooted racial injustice and how it permeates all systems, all resources, education, workforce, housing, all of those we've named. So I think they say when you work with the hardest issues, the most uncomfortable, the issues that make you discomforted, as I saw in your wonderful organizational principles, you always can root out more than if you just work with what is comfortable, easy, within reach, and on top. But that's going to take a lot of our allies and people who've been comfortable with white supremacy and the systems that are embedded with racism to actually be willing to sacrifice, to step up or to step over or to step back and allow a coalition of people who are willing to push more than just us forward, who are willing to push so we're not the only ones continually asking for redress against injustice. And that's going to take some reckoning. We're in a racial reckoning moment. The last year has been. It should not take another death, a violent, vicious murder in plain sight, as happened to George Floyd, which is when so many white Americans said they got it, that they believed us when we said how we were being mistreated. So many people could not look away. And that's why the cities and governments and politicians began to talk differently, began to move differently. But we have, even philanthropy had to look differently at where they resource, where they put their money when they say they want a greater country, a greater community. But I think it's going to take more pressure from those who are sitting next to and familiar to politicians to move with us, to get behind our leadership, and to be able to mobilize and move forward.
Moving away from that performative response you talked about into an actual sacrifice.
Solidarity statements have their place, and I tell people their place is on paper. It's the actions and the measurable outcomes that really matter. That's a start.
Great.
But if it's merely a solidarity statement, it carries no weight when you look to see what comes next.
Great point. Okay. The next one fits right into that. It says, so to people who cannot join in the peaceful protests and marches, but they can't afford to donate, what would be your best advice for them how to contribute?
Ryan, are you there? Lily?
Ryan says she's not in a position to speak right now.
Okay.
I can contribute a little bit to this and some of the other. Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Copenhagen. I'm a recently elected executive committee member at large. And I am just delighted to see everybody here. So this has been a really fun conversation. But the real work of our branch gets done in committees. And we have several committees that are in acute need of some energy and some folks who could spend time helping get some of our priorities off the ground. As Sharon mentioned, we have just been in office for a tiny bit over a month. And so we are still sort of coordinating a lot of efforts, but we have a variety of committees that are very interested in getting off the ground. And this is a great opportunity to join those committees and help us shape the priorities that those committees will be focused on in the years to come. Including I saw a question in the chat about programs focused on schools and education. We have an education committee. And if folks send an email to assistant@pdxnwaacp.org, that's me, and I can help get folks connected with the right committee depending on your interests.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. There's also a question in the chat that talks about how much they love seeing the photos of youth involved in the efforts toward racial justice. And the question is, how can our youth and students get involved with the NAACP? Can you talk about some of the specific opportunities?
Yes. First of all, they can come to meetings and they will be heard. Their thinking is actually supported by the leadership that is in place now. They also, 25 young people would cause the formation and the reformation of a youth council, a youth component that would work with those of us who are no longer those young people, but they get to decide, they get to say, they get to set their agenda around racial justice and Black Lives Matter and political action for young people who are going out into this world and jobs and housing. So our NAACP nationally had an AXO, which is known to be about academics and cultural and technological Olympics. Our chapter has had a dormant youth council for a number of years, and we're looking to be able to support young people in being able to organize and to have their own council that would meet and be supported and encouraged and collaborated with 25. And we're even looking at ways to resource young people who say they cannot afford the $15 fee. And so we're very active about preparing the road. And there are many young people already come who walk the road. So if you're interested, if you know young people, we have that education committee is absolutely solid and excited. And we can direct you. Get your friends together. If you're asking me, one of our at-large members, Susan Elliott, has already invited me that I'm going to be talking to young people. She's gathering together 20 or more of them. I love the idea of listening, talking, and being involved because I used to be one of them. And so if you want to get us going, you let us know that you want to have a youth council, and we'll help you and work with you to allow that to grow up again in the Portland branch.
Oh, that sounds really promising. There is another question in here for Lily, and it says, could you speak more about the types of committees you have? And I know that in the chat, there's lots of different people posting some connections through the web, but it might be good to actually talk about the kinds of committees that might spark someone's interest.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So currently our most active committee, in large part because of the passion of the current committee members, is our environmental justice committee. And Donovan can probably speak more to the current activities of that committee. As I mentioned, we also have an education committee. We have a political action committee. Help me out, folks. I'm pulling up our list as I'm talking, but other committee members, we have thank you. Donovan, Ryan, we have a finance committee. Oh, an economic development and housing committee that is definitely looking for some active members. And then, you know, if there are interests in other areas, those are our standing committees, but additional committees can be formed based on membership interest. So if a group of members are interested in a particular activity or focus, they can make a proposal to President Gary-Smith and the rest of the executive committee. So it's a membership-driven organization. It is led by the amazing leaders that you see on this call, and it really is, it's membership driven, it's membership focused, and you have an opportunity to guide the direction.
That's terrific.
I'll let Donovan speak.
Go ahead, Donovan.
Sure. You know, like Lily said, the committees, a lot of them need to be reactivated. But we do have, I don't know if Ms. Sharon already said this, if so, I'll just be reiterating. We have more than 1,000 members right now. And so we want people to be active members within the organization to help drive the work forward. In terms of environmental justice, Jay Brannon has been chairing that for some time. And so it's because of her leadership that the organization or the committee has been going as strongly as it has been. We're looking at a couple bills in the legislative session right now and seeing how we can throw our support to those, particularly around land use. Jay could better speak to those things But we also are, Jay and I have spoken about what kind of programming would be most relevant for our community as well, from an environmental standpoint. So we actually were doing some cooking about 2 hours ago on some possibilities. So really excited about things like that and bringing it back to folks and seeing where it goes. But as it's been said, the work's going to happen in committees. Once you pay your $30, you're a member. But that's not what the work is. So
Good
hope that
point.
people show up for the work.
There you go. I see that in the chat, a lot of people are asking questions about, is there a health committee? They said there is one, but it has not yet been as active as it could be, but they very much want to make that active. There's another great comment in here about the education committee and the question about, is it possible to help push for more truthful and historical accuracies, particularly Black American history and Native American history being taught in the school system locally? And I think that with an active committee, I think what I hear Donovan saying is the work takes place in committee. So it's membership driven and those are possible. But are there any specific initiatives right now that you'd like to talk about related to that?
I think the fact that the environmental justice and environmental change, and given the suggestion that it was all, mirrors and not true, we are seeing the impact of it. So the fact that that committee, and then if you think of the Portland Clean Energy Fund that is generating this money from well-heeled businesses to be able to support whether it's retrofitting or getting ready, those are kind of at the top right now because of this time when there's so much attention and there's so much environmental degradation that people are actually recognizing. Here in Oregon, the fires, I mean, the things that have happened that show us that our climate is absolutely in a pain mode. So those are at the top, but education equity for us, the disparities that continue in education, have to be addressed, not continuing to tell us about data that says the lags are so significant for African American, Indigenous, so many others, people of color, marginalized and poor people. So that committee is very actively engaged and is led by one who has worked on educational uplifting and focusing on young people of color who are marginalized in school before they get to school, and certainly as they try to pass through the process. Those just of necessity are active committees because they're responding to the issues that are always on top. But they're not the only committees, and we want our committees to have a synergy and work hand in hand because these issues do not stay boxed in. And we know that health in a family, access to food, quality of living, where you live, the climate. So we see all of these connections. Where your zip code is has so much to do with where your health codes are going to be. And so we are looking at the interconnections and the interrelatedness of so many of these issues. But people can choose to sit on committee, to think, to imagine, to organize, to advocate, and to move legislation in a virtual time, and certainly when we're all able to be face to face or down in Salem.
All right, and there's a great message in the chat from Sharon herself, which reminds us that they are recruiting members to these various committees. There is more work to be done than there are people to do it. So looking for advocates, education equity advocates, environmental justice, seriously doing justice and climate change work and land use work. All are looking for those. There's also a very large request for legal redress that comes to their office. So if there are attorneys or paralegals amongst the participants here, or you know someone who might be interested in that type of work, then really, truly reach out. It looks like there's so many opportunities to serve. One thing I'm hearing, Sharon, is that the opportunities to serve, you can take whatever skills base you bring with you and put it to work right away. It isn't about always about the money. It's about the elbow grease that goes into getting all this work done and bringing to the table whatever skills you can to address those issues.
If you come and tell us that you want to do something, we'll figure out something with you. Trust me. We're a volunteer run organization. Right now, many of us are putting in easily 40 to 50 hours. And when I see someone's partner on the screen with them, that I like to think that that is your social time. Because we are spending so much time not only addressing those things that transitions require, but also looking at the infrastructure and the ability to build ourselves up as an organization. With administration, we have programs. People want to join with us. They want to collaborate. They want us to lead. They want us to hire staff. We're looking at all of that because if we have been around over 100 years, we have intention to be around another 100. I might not be, but the work, unless something miraculous happens that undoes all of the racial harm, the second-class citizenship, the inequities in our society, we still have a road ahead of us. And that's what I think I was taught most about, those who believed in freedom, who were willing to even die for it to be advanced. We're standing on the shoulders, and others will be standing on our shoulders. So this branch has history, it has legacy, it has purpose, and we need all the volunteers we can get, just as I'm sure your organization. We could do some partnerships, some collaboration. We could find out what your mission and your action, and that's how we do this work to have a mass mobilization for racial justice, for social justice, and for all of our lives to matter.
That's a great point. And, you know, the fact that we're working hard to really educate and get the word out about what the real needs are, what the real issues are in Oregon and in Portland and, you know, the areas that we are all here from is something that doesn't and shouldn't be a one-time opportunity. It should be a chance for us to build relationships and keep each other informed. There might be times where you know of something that you think really needs some higher profile in the public that we can help with or something. So I think building partnerships is a really important part of all the things that all of us are trying to do. So I think that's a very important point you're making. I did have a question as we're waiting. There's a few more things that are going on here. So there's a good feedback about, you know, I'm going to point one thing out that was kind of in the chat because I think it's so important. There was a question about, you know, has the NAACP met with Black and minority bar associations for pro bono work? And what I particularly love is that saying that response that says, well, how do we find opportunities for white people to contribute to the pro bono work? And then allowing some of the limited resources that people do have to pay the people of color, Black and brown legal experts that you need to engage in the work. So, and there was a very positive response to that. It's constantly looking at all of our assumptions every single time, every opportunity. So I think that's great. There is a question here about, could you give us explain a little bit more about the Religious Affairs Committee?
What I can say, and you would have seen it in fact as well on Dr. King and others, people often ask about Dr. Haynes, who has shown that religious and faith leaders have always been intimately connected to the advancement of the NAACP. There are a number of them. In fact, a whole lot of faith leaders are heading chapters. And so the reason that I offer that up is the history began for so many of us. The African American church experiences where all your learning, teaching, where literacy, where preparing to vote, where people organized in order to go out and combat the impacts of racism. So that relationship, the churches were very active, but I will tell you, it was Black women who forced the pastors to open up the churches after Sunday services to allow community people, even those who were not their members, to come into what is a safe space, to organize, to be taught, to have leadership skills developed. So that relationship is really very intricately woven in. But now the religious affairs, those, if you looked at the front lines when Dr. King and when John Lewis and others all marched, it was always an array of interracial faith leaders who were carrying the banners and walking into harm's way together. Now we look at religious liberty, and it's called religious affairs because that's a standing committee. But looking at the responsibility of those who believe that we're all created equal,
Right.
to actually stand much more in solidarity, to take a risk of not just speaking the words on a Sunday or a Saturday, but actually embodying what it means to seek together. And so there's a younger pastor who wanted it to be renamed or to hold on to the traditional name, but he elevated it to religious liberty so that anyone and how you do and don't practice is not a barrier to being able to be engaged in the work of social justice. And so he calls it religious liberty and social justice. So there's no confusion about how people would gather together around the table to plot and to imagine how to take their messages into houses of worship and other spaces. And the bottom line is racial and social justice, the activism of the past returning to the present moment. So I'm excited to
That's
hear that
exciting.
kind of definition or defining what it could be.
Thank you, thank you. We have Marietta Gary-Smith, who would like to offer some perspective on people who are seeking space to engage. So Marietta?
Thank you. Good evening. If you heard my name, then I know you've made a connection of some kind. And I see folks I know waving. So hello to all family, extended kin, chosen, and bio. It's wonderful to be here in this space. I am the daughter of Sharon Gary-Smith, and I'm a legacy kid in the sense that I have been raised in social justice and movement spaces. And so what I want to offer this evening is to give folks an opportunity to consider, what does active agitation look like for you? I've seen a lot in the chat around what the NAACP needs, people asking questions about ways to be engaged and involved. And as someone who is raised in an environment where the work that I did was part of my payment for me to work in service to and for my community, I encourage folks to consider what you have available that can be working in service to the organization. And so it's important and necessary to understand that there are needs that the organization has, but I encourage folks to be proactive and come forward and know what you have to offer and ask, how can this best serve the needs of the platform that this organization is supporting? What ways can I be of service to this organization and in service for the Black folks of this organization, of this city, of this state, of this nation? And what does that look like in real life, right? So if we're talking about limited resources, that may mean that you have the opportunity to provide monetary support. That may mean that you're going to work specifically around criminal justice and supporting those who are returning back to community and providing services or creating opportunities for avenues to bring our folks back into healed spaces, right? And not having to be fractured about what that looks like. So I want to encourage people to be really clear about what their level of commitment is, to not hold shame around that, but to also be honest that what it looks like for you may not necessarily serve in this moment, but that doesn't mean that you can't serve. And it also removes the labor for Black and Brown folks doing this work, having to navigate and figure out how you can be of service. We encourage you to come to us and say, I can be of service in this way. How would this best fit you? And so I just want to offer that as something that I've been raised in, and understanding that my best foot forward is the way that I come into the space, the way that I enter space, and the way that I leave space. And so I encourage folks to consider what that would look like to be able to serve, so you can have a collective movement moving forward to improve the lives of all folks here in Portland, all folks here in the state and across the nation. Great job, Mom.
Thank you.
That's wonderful, wonderful. I love the fact that, you know, it is true. Sometimes people come together and say, well, how can I serve you? And all the burden is put on the person who needs the help. Whereas coming with an offer of your time, your expertise, your whatever it might be, in whatever way, gives someone a chance to actually put you to work, which is really a great point. So thank you for sharing that so much. That's really perfect. There is a question here. It says, does NAACP partner with different workplaces that are striving to improve equity issues and anti-racist practices?
I know that each of us could speak to that, but I'll tell you, since we're still in the month of February, right? The
Right.
number of requests in February, the smallest month of the year to hold so much around Black history, has been overwhelming, but it's also reminded me that the work of improving workplaces for all of us, and particularly those who have been most marginalized, the way that we can improve culture matters to us, the culture of a workplace, whether it's toxic, and we experience that, whether it's toxic or whether it's made to include and be clear that there are people here with a variety of experiences. Some of us have done that work for many, many years. We have amongst us, as you would clearly take part, those who have been race folks, is what my people used to call it, who actually are informed, educated around all of the information that's not shared in the schools. We have people who have been equity consultants before it was called equity. We have folks who are used to working in university corporate systems. And so we're familiar with that dance of moving organizations to talk about, as I said before, what they'd like to do and be in solidarity, and not really working well with people that are right there in their space. But we're also volunteer again. So we're bombarded with these requests, and we look at what is the outcome? How would the outcome of being engaged further the vision and the mission that we have to achieve justice for African American, Black people, other people of color? And would this move that agenda forward by this partnership, by this relationship? Or is it separate, again, Black, brown, other people being hired to do the work now that it's hot, when we've been doing it and people often expect it for free? So we're trying to give examples of how we can do this work, how we can work in partnership, and then how we contract individually and collectively to move this in all of the places that must move forward. Otherwise, justice doesn't come. So please call us. Please check in with us. Please write to the assistant. We take every request seriously, and we respond, because that's what you do when you have your eyes on the prize. So thank you ever so much. This has been so much richer than anything I could have imagined, but I thought it would be great.
That's incredible. I really appreciate your time so much. You know, I think that I'm going to give the people out there an opportunity to go ahead and put their last questions in. We're going to probably wrap this up right around 8:30 formally. And then if there's still someone who wants to speak with you in person, then we'll hang out after that. But for right now, please go to the chat room and let us know if you have any more direct questions. I think when I was watching your early part of your presentation, one of the things that really struck me is some of your pictures from the 50s, which showed so many men and women and youth working side by side. Has NAACP always been that integrated with men, women, and youth all actively engaged?
From the very beginning, when we talk about these standing committees and the fact that there was youth councils, there really was almost a directive, because the young people, I mean, John Lewis started as a young person on the lines in the fight for justice. And all of us have a little bit of, belief that you have to be in good and necessary trouble. You have to trouble the waters. A lot of our songs, the history of civil rights songs, were about troubling the waters, causing the water to roil in order for justice to come. And so they must have done it, whether it's in the Far East, in Asia. And so it's important that you work with them early, often, and you don't always have to lead them. Young people are very good at having a path, may not look familiar, but it's the path of us continuing to have new faces, new ideas, new leadership in the movement. And so I think that it's always been important to the NAACP, and it's evident in the pictures, in the early history, and in the current history. We want that to be the history in Portland. That'll be one of the legacies of this new leadership group.
That's great. That's really great. You know, I
And
think that,
finally, for me, if I can, finally, is that we're elected. People talk about, oh, there's another change at the NAACP. You're elected for 2 years. So I'm looking at all of you who could be officers of the NAACP when I really am retired. And Donovan's young, but he's going to want to have a lot of good folks around him, Ryan, Tamia, all of them. So please, every 2 years, we got elected in late 2020, and in 2022, November, there'll be a new election. Of course, some of us could choose to run again, but I want you to know there'll be some openings, some spaces. Thank you.
excellent. Okay, I think that we're kind of at the end of our questions. I'll give everyone a chance to do that. I think what we'll do right now is wrap up the formal portion of our evening and stop the actual formal recording, but we'll stay online for anyone who might like to just unmute themselves and speak a little bit with you. So thank you, incredible time that you've been together. I also want to note that it's really great to have the support we've had from contributions like donors that are out there like you. We are also in that place where we would love to support our speakers financially. So contributions that come in help us. We're just a startup, and so we have a lot of growth to do. And really thank all of you for your time tonight. So I'm going to open this up. So if you would like to chat with Ms. Gary-Smith, please go ahead and unmute yourself and take the time and get a chance to visit a little bit.
Wow.